Imagine being 9 years old and learning that someone wanted to kill you, your dad, your brothers, and your mom. That's what I found out when I was 9 years old. It all began on a perfect summer day. It was the end of summer, August. It was hot, sunny, not a cloud in the sky. And we spent all day at the beach. Everything was ideal until that night when everything changed. My uncle was a police officer, and he worked the midnight shift. My dad left for work, just like normal. He hadn't gone probably half a mile from our house when a car pulled up behind him, pulled out alongside him, and he was shot through the driver's side window of his car with a shotgun. The shotgun blast tore through his face and ripped off his lower jaw. Before he lost consciousness, he wrote, "Not an accident." He realized that they were trying to kill him, and he feared for his family's life. On that summer night, my childhood ended. I was never alone again. We were guarded 24 hours a day. Everybody had a gun. We were fenced in. We had an attack dog. And we had a sniper on the roof with a long-range rifle. You couldn't go out. I'd hidden a steak knife under my mattress, and I would just lay there and listen. I just knew that the people who shot my father were not going to stop until we were all dead. Next door to our house, there was an old graveyard. It sounds morbid, but it was actually this beautiful place to go and play. There were these old trees that were perfect for climbing and grassy lawns to play tag and hide and seek. We spent a lot of time over there. Falmouth, Massachusetts, was the ideal place to grow up. Every summer day, we would get up in the morning. My mom would pack a lunch, and we would head out to Old Silver Beach. By the end of the summer, we'd all be brown as berries, and just relaxed and happy. That summer, it was me, my two older brothers, Eric and Sean, my dad, my mom, who was studying to be a nurse, and my cousin Kelly, who was helping out my parents by taking care of us kids. She was there to have fun, but babysitting was how she earned her rent. My father was a police officer. Dad's first day in uniform. In his uniform, my dad looked incredibly handsome. I thought he looked like a movie star. To me, he seemed invincible. My Uncle John was a guy that you didn't mess with. He took his job and his position very seriously. The John Busby I fell in love with was an athlete. He was handsome, very self-confident, and one of the nicest fathers. He was a wrestle on the ground kind of dad, and a hold my little girl close kind of dad. John always gave us a sense of safety, that nothing would happen to us as long as he was around. August 31st, 1979, was the day that changed our lives forever. Nothing was ever the same after that. It was the start of Labor Day weekend, a Friday. We were out in the driveway painting my dad's car. This was my mom's way of getting us out of the house that night, so that my dad could sleep, because he worked the midnight shift. This is a photo that my mom took of me that night. When I was growing up, it was really hard for me to look at that photo, because I would study the girl in the picture and think, what is that girl thinking about? What is her life like? After that night, it felt like my childhood ended. That night, my dad got up to get ready for work. My brothers and I would have been in bed when I heard the knock on the door. I was watching Benny Hill, and in fact, I was laughing. I can remember I heard someone screaming or crying. At first, I thought it was the TV. I woke up and came out of my room, and I saw my dad's friend Rick Smith was there. He was in uniform, and he was talking to my mom. She was crying and screaming, and she kept saying, "No, no, no, no." She kept trying to push him away from her. I said, "Polly, there's been an incident involving John." She goes, "What happened? What happened?" And I said, "He's been shot." I made a noise. I remember making a noise, and falling back against the wall and sinking down. I was saying, "What's wrong? What's going on?" She didn't even acknowledge that I had come out of my room. There was a great deal of confusion. We knew something bad had happened to him, and I told Kelly, "I'll call you as soon as I know what's happening." The next thing I knew, I was in the cruiser. I could see lights everywhere, and I could see John's Volkswagen riddled with holes. I thought to myself, this is bad. This is really bad. By the time we got to the hospital, there were doctors and nurses all around him. He was in a triage unit. The doctors were all over him, and he kept beckoning that he wanted to write. My dad managed to write a note. He said, "Polly and the kids are not safe." When he wrote that note, I knew there was one person in town who was capable of trying to kill John, and that person was capable of killing his whole family. It felt like I was in a storm, and I didn't know how bad that storm was going to get or if any of us were ever going to be safe again. My Aunt Polly had just left with the police officer. The instructions were to stay away from the windows, keep the house unlit, and keep the door locked. I closed all the shutters, locked all the doors, and turned out the lights. I don't know how much time had passed, but I saw the lights of a car pull into the driveway. I was expecting a police cruiser to pull into the yard, but it wasn't. There was a guy in a red car, and he had a rifle. I didn't recognize him. I can remember that Sean, at least, was very panicked, saying, "Who's that guy? He's got a gun. Is he coming to kill us?" I was scared. I was in great fear that that individual was going to come in and kill whoever was in the house. "Get in the back of the house," Kelly said, trying to keep us calm. There was no way out, and fleeing wasn't an option. All I could think of was that we needed to hide and make it look like nobody was still at the house. Everything was whispers. "We need to be quiet until they go away," Kelly kept saying. Then we heard someone knock at the door, knocking louder and louder. Kelly just said, "Stay quiet, stay quiet." I was talking to myself, saying, "He's going to go away. It's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Please stop knocking. Please go away." And then, it stopped. I took a deep breath, thinking, "Thank God, it's over. He's going away." But suddenly, we heard knocks at the back door. That's when I realized they weren't going away. Kelly quickly made a plan. She said, "This is the plan. I want you guys to go into the attic and hide in there. Do not come out of the attic until I come and get you, or until your mom comes home. Don't come out for anybody else." All I could think was, we're going to go up in the attic, and this guy is going to come looking for us. We have to be so quiet and not move. It was hard to balance on the rafters in the attic, and I was in a nightgown. I didn't want to fall into the insulation, which was very prickly. So, I just tried to stay still and not make a sound. We waited for whoever was going to come up there. The kids were in the attic, and the guy was still knocking at the back door, not going away. I remember thinking, what am I going to do? The first thing I had to do was protect those children and make it look like no one was home. If there was any entry into the house, I wanted to make it seem as though I was the only one in the residence. I walked over to the window beside the door and, at that moment, the guy pulled out a police badge. He said he was a Falmouth police officer, and that he was there to watch over John Busby's family. We heard Kelly say, "He's a cop. It's okay. You can come down." Once we heard that, we thought it was safe. Throughout the evening, more police officers showed up to watch over the home, and at that point, I realized that things were not going to be okay the next day. At the hospital, they were trying to get an airway down, but they couldn't. They started giving my dad morphine. I heard somebody say, "He won't go down. We can't get him to relax." One of the officers behind me, I think it was Rick Smith, said, "We have somebody at the house with the kids. We've got somebody there, and others are en route." It was like you could see John just relax. He laid back, and they were finally able to slip the airway in. I truly believe that John overwhelmed the doctors at Falmouth Hospital. They had never seen anything like that. They didn't know quite what to do. John looked like a monster. His handsome face was normal from his forehead to just above his nose. Below that, it looked like his tissue had stretched and stretched. His chin was now down around his chest, and there was no jaw. I wondered, how are we going to repair this? How are we going to put this back together? from Falmouth Hospital. They took him by ambulance to Mass General Hospital. The doctors reassured me that they had gotten him there in time to prevent him from bleeding out, but it would depend on how strong he was to come through the surgery. The morning after the shooting, we left to stay with my uncle near the hospital in Boston, where my dad was being treated. No one was told where we were going, and when we got there, we were instructed not to tell anyone where we were staying or who we were staying with. This was the beginning of the year that we disappeared. When my dad became aware in the recovery room, his eyes fluttered open, and then he started looking from tube to tube. He realized that he couldn't talk, and I saw a look of panic in his eyes. He was shaking his head, and he motioned for me to come closer. He grabbed my hand and wrote on a notepad, "Don't leave me like this." He didn't want to be on a respirator or live like that, an invalid. He was asking me to let him go if it came to that. I said, "You can't leave me here. You can't leave me with these 3 kids. I can't be left alone. You have to stay. You have to come back. We'll make it." He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe on his own. He couldn't eat. And he couldn't even drink water. He was completely dependent on the machines. His face was wired shut. And I remember thinking, if he survives, how will we ever fix this? Once I saw him, I thought, wow, they really meant to kill him. I remember going to bed at night, thinking, everybody likes my dad. Who could want to kill my dad? My father knew, the instant he was shot, who was trying to kill him, and he was able to communicate that to the officers at the scene. When I first saw him, he was shaking, trembling like a dog, holding the towels up to his face. I asked him, "Who did this, John?" He got out a pen and a notebook that he always carried with him and wrote, "Not an accident, Mel Reine." John didn't see who shot him, but he knew exactly who would want him dead. Melvin Reine was in the trash hauling business, and he had contracts all over Cape Cod. It was a very lucrative business. He was also a convicted arsonist, with a reputation for getting even with people by sneaking in the night and burning properties. His favorite saying was, "I smell smoke," which was code for, "Something of yours is going to burn." Melvin Reine was also suspected of multiple murders. He was suspected of killing 3 people, and in 2 of those cases, the bodies were never found. One of those cases was his wife, Wanda Meadows Reine, who went missing in 1971. Melvin claimed he dropped her off at a bus station, and she was never seen again. About a year later, a teenage boy named Jeff Flanagan went missing. He had been dating a girl who babysat for the Reine family, and whom Melvin was also interested in. Jeff's body was later found shot to death in a cranberry bog directly across the street from Melvin Reine's house. Melvin Reine was also suspected of multiple murders. He was suspected of killing 3 people, and in 2 of those cases, the bodies were never found. One of those cases was his wife, Wanda Meadows Reine, who went missing in 1971. Melvin claimed he dropped her off at a bus station, and she was never seen again. About a year later, a teenage boy named Jeff Flanagan went missing. He had been dating a girl who babysat for the Reine family, and whom Melvin was also interested in. Jeff's body was later found shot to death in a cranberry bog directly across the street from Melvin Reine's house. Melvin Reine basically walked free from all those crimes. He considered himself untouchable, and he extended that belief to his family. If the police dared give a ticket to anyone in his family, Melvin would march into the police station, tear up the ticket, and demand that it be erased from the logbook. Well, my dad was either brave enough or foolhardy enough to take on Melvin Reine. It didn't matter who you were if you broke the law, my dad would give you a ticket. So, he had run-ins with the Reines. The worst incident occurred when my dad was directing traffic at a fatal accident. Melvin's brother, John Reine, was there in his semi-truck. Instead of waiting for the scene to clear, John decided to drive straight through the accident scene and hit my dad with his truck. My father went to his house, arrested him, and charged him with assault and battery with a deadly weapon. Just before the court hearing for that charge, my dad was shot. I instantly thought that Melvin Reine had shot him. And now, everyone expected the police to go after Melvin. There were cops on the force who wanted to go straight to his house and drag him out. But there were others in positions of power who were too afraid to act. You have to understand, even the police chief's car had been burned in his own yard, and everyone assumed Melvin was behind it, though they couldn't prove it. I think Melvin Reine had something on someone in town. He was either paying people off or had some kind of blackmail material, maybe from some illicit behavior. Whatever it was, he had so much control that the police didn't go after him, and the town was too scared to do anything about it. I would challenge anyone to go to any police department and ask what they would do if one of their officers was shot in the line of duty. Their response would be, "We won't stop investigating until we have an arrest." That didn't happen in Falmouth when my dad was shot. This is the police log from that night. It lists everything, every little detail about disturbances in town. But at the hour of my dad's shooting, there is nothing in the log. They didn't record it. They erased it from the police log. My father's shooting never appeared in the records, and to my knowledge, the Falmouth police never even interviewed Melvin Reine about the shooting. They didn't question him. I've often wondered how this small, unassuming man could get away with what he did, without even being questioned. It was clear to a lot of us that there was something behind the scenes more powerful than Melvin Reine. He wasn't acting alone. At the hospital, my dad was fighting to stay alive. He didn't want to die. He wanted justice. And their biggest mistake was not killing him that night, because now, he was determined to find a way to take matters into his own hands. I'm John Busby, and this is my story. They didn't kill me, but I almost did. The police told me the investigation had been totally botched. I determined that there was only one way justice was going to be done. I needed to get healthy, get out of the hospital, and kill the man responsible for this. That was the only way. I had to take care of this myself. My father knew the instant that he was shot who was trying to kill him, and he was able to communicate that to the officers who were at the scene. When I first saw him, he was shaking like a dog. He was holding towels up to his face, and I asked him, "Who did this, John?" He grabbed a pen and his notebook, and in his shaking hand, he wrote, "Not an accident, Mel Reine." John did not see who shot him, but he knew exactly who would want him dead. Melvin Reine was a trash hauler with contracts all over Cape Cod, and it was a very lucrative business. He was also a convicted arsonist, and he had a reputation for getting even with people by sneaking in at night and burning their property. His favorite saying was, "I smell smoke," meaning there was going to be a fire in someone's future, whether it was their house, their car, or something else they owned. Melvin Reine was also suspected of murder. There were 3 people he was believed to have killed, and in 2 of those cases, the bodies were never recovered. His first wife, Wanda Reine, went missing in 1971. He claimed that he dropped her off at a bus station, and she was never seen again. About a year later, a teenage boy named Jeff Flanagan went missing in Falmouth. He was dating a 17-year-old girl who babysat for the Reine family, a girl Melvin was also interested in. Jeff Flanagan's body was later found in a cranberry bog directly across the street from Melvin Reine's home. Another young man, Paul Allward, who worked for Melvin, was supposed to testify against him in an arson case. The police promised to protect him, but after they escorted him to the ferry to leave the area, Paul disappeared. Melvin Reine walked free on all of these accounts, and no one was ever charged. I think Melvin Reine considered himself untouchable, and that extended to his immediate family. If anyone tried to issue a ticket to someone in his family, Melvin would storm into the police station and demand the ticket be torn up. My father, however, was either brave enough or foolish enough to take on Melvin Reine. If you broke the law, my dad didn't care who you were or who you were connected to. You were going to get a ticket and be taken to court. One of the run-ins my father had with the Raines involved Melvin's brother, John Reine. My dad was directing traffic at a fatal accident scene when John Reine drove his semi-truck right through the scene, actually hitting my father with the truck. My dad went to his house and arrested him, charging him with assault and battery with a deadly weapon. Just before the court hearing for that case, my dad was shot. When I found out what had happened to my father, I thought instantly that Melvin Reine had been behind it. And I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of people in town who wanted to go straight to Reine's house and drag him out. But there were also people in positions of power who were too afraid to do anything about it. The Raines had a reputation, and no one wanted to cross them. I would challenge anyone to go to any police department and ask what they would do if one of their officers were shot in the line of duty. I can guarantee that the response would be, "We're not going to stop investigating until we find the person responsible." But that didn't happen in Falmouth. When my dad was shot, the investigation was practically non-existent. This is the police log from that night. It lists everything: accidents, disorderly groups, drunks near Falmouth Heights, barking dogs. But it doesn't mention that a police officer was shot. They removed it from the log. They documented everything else happening in town, but not this. To my knowledge, the Falmouth Police Department never even interviewed Melvin Reine regarding the shooting of my father. I've often wondered just how this one man could get away with so much without even being questioned. It was clear to a lot of us that there was something more powerful behind the scenes than Melvin Reine himself. He had something on someone, whether he was paying people off or blackmailing them. He had control. The police weren't going to go after him. Meanwhile, my father didn't want to die. He wanted to live, if only to take care of what had been done to him. Their biggest mistake was that they didn't kill him. That was their biggest mistake. My name is John Busby. They didn't kill me, but I came very close to doing something I would regret forever. Someone's going to have to do a voiceover for me, because I'm hard to understand. But these are my words, and this is my story. I was on my way into work for the midnight shift when a vehicle pulled up behind me, matching my speed. Then it pulled out as if to pass, but it didn't pass, it just stayed alongside me. Suddenly, a shotgun blast came through my driver's side window and tore through my face. I felt my lower jaw being ripped apart. Somehow, I managed to stay conscious long enough to pull my car over and scribble a note that said, "Not an accident," because I knew exactly what had happened. I got word, while I was in the hospital, that the investigation into my shooting had been totally botched. I realized there was only one way that justice was going to be done. I was going to have to take care of it myself. I was going to have to get healthy, get out of the hospital, and kill the man who had tried to kill me. We came back from Boston after the surgeries, and when we pulled into the driveway, there were police cars everywhere. The police made it clear that my family and I needed protection. We had police guards stationed at our property 24 hours a day, armed to the teeth. Everywhere I went, there was a cop following me, whether I was at home, at school, or in public. There was always someone there. My first day back at school was terrifying. I remember going to the lunchroom, and a boy came over to the table, leaned in close, and whispered, "You know why that cop is here, don't you? Because somebody wanted to kill your dad, and somebody is going to come and kill you too." I was just 9 years old, but from that moment, I knew the gravity of what had happened to my dad. It wasn't just him, they wanted us too. Life changed overnight. We weren't treated like normal kids anymore. Parents didn't want their children near us, because we were seen as dangerous, almost like we were carrying a virus. Kids stopped sitting next to me, and some were even pulled from my classroom, because no parent wanted their child near a ticking time bomb. I began to live my life in constant fear, always wondering if the person next to me was out to hurt me or my family. 4 months, we had police protection around the clock. But as the costs of keeping us guarded continued to rise, the town decided to protect us in a different way. They built an 8-foot high fence around our property, installed an alarm system, and brought in an attack dog named Max. Max was supposed to protect us, but he scared me. He was aggressive, and if my dad wasn't around, the dog had to be chained up. I was so afraid of him that I couldn't even go outside when Max was loose. My father said that Max was there to protect us, but it felt like we were prisoners in our own home. We were living in a state of constant fear. My dad was different too. He wasn't the same man he had been before. He pushed everyone away, including me, my brothers, and my mom. He couldn't physically be close to us anymore because he was so badly injured, but he also withdrew emotionally. He would disappear 4 days into his room, and when he was around us, he was angry, consumed by a simmering rage that was always just beneath the surface. We stopped doing all the things that we used to do as a family. No more trips to the beach, no more family outings. We hardly ever left the house anymore. I could see the turmoil in my father's eyes. It was like he was constantly thinking, constantly planning. There was a part of him that was always somewhere else. One day, I overheard my dad say that the investigation into his shooting was dead in the water. The police weren't going to arrest anyone. That's when I knew what he was planning to do. The only way out of this nightmare, he decided, was for us to leave town. We needed to move somewhere safe, far away from Falmouth. By then, my dad would be strong enough and healthy enough to take care of things himself. He planned to arm himself with an untraceable weapon, cut through the woods across from the dump, and wait for Melvin Reine. When Reine emptied his truck, my dad would take him out with one clean shot. His plan was to put a hole in Raine's head through the windshield and finish him off right there. That was my father's plan for revenge, and nothing was going to stop him. When we made the decision to leave Falmouth, my parents made it clear that we couldn't tell anyone where we were going or what had happened. We had to disappear completely. The town gave us a police escort as far as the Bourne Bridge, and once we crossed it, we were on our own. My dad was being paid just $200 a week for getting shot in the line of duty. We had to sell our dog Max to help cover the costs of moving, and Falmouth was kind enough to let us keep the money from that sale. We needed every cent of it. We drew names from a hat to decide where we would go, and we ended up in Tennessee. It was the last place anyone would expect us to go. But it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like we were driving into hell. The deeper south we went, the hotter it got, and the more isolated we felt. I remember thinking, after everything that's happened, after all the pain we've endured, this is what we get. This is our new life. When we arrived in Tennessee, it felt like we had stepped into another world. My dad grew a mountain man beard, and we settled into life on a farm in the middle of nowhere. For the first time in years, we felt safe, but it didn't feel like home. We had to assume disguises, almost pretending to be a part of this new place, so that no one would suspect anything. I became like the other girls at school. I changed the way I spoke, adopted a southern accent, got a perm, wore lip gloss, and lied about my past. I told stories about my dad's injury and our move, trying to make it seem normal. But deep down, I knew we had left our old selves behind forever. Those people we had been in Falmouth, they were gone. The first couple of years in Tennessee, we lived in constant vigilance. Our house was isolated, and my dad was always on edge, watching every car that drove by. He was always looking, always waiting for something to go wrong. He kept a close watch on anyone who seemed out of place. It was hard to relax, but eventually, that constant fear started to fade. My dad began to work on the farm, chopping wood, doing physical labor that seemed to help release his anger. He split wood we didn't need just for the sake of splitting it, as if smashing the wood was a way to smash the pain and rage inside him. From time to time, Dad had to go back to Boston for more surgeries. Every time he went, they had to shave off his beard, and I knew how much that pained him. The beard was his armor, the thing that kept him from seeing what had been done to his face. When the beard came off, he saw the damage and all that anger would come flooding back. It was as if seeing his face again made him remember everything he had been through. One time, while he was in Boston for a surgery, Dad visited his uncle. His uncle pulled him aside and said, "Nephew, come down to the cellar. I've got something to show you." Dad followed him downstairs, and when his uncle opened a gun case, there it was, a .22 caliber rifle, complete with a scope and a silencer. It was everything Dad needed to carry out his plan. But when Dad saw the gun, something changed. He thanked his uncle, but then he said, "I won't need it." When my dad came back from Boston after that surgery, he walked into the house and looked me straight in the eye. The first thing he said was, "I'm done." I didn't know what he meant at first, but then he explained, "I'm done with the surgeries. I'm done with going back there. I'm done with revenge." For the first time in years, I saw the weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ready to move on. And I knew, for the first time, that we might actually be okay. The person my dad became after that moment was someone new. He had gone through so much, but he had come out the other side. He stopped talking about revenge, and he started living again. We built a life in Tennessee, and it was nothing like the life we had in Falmouth. We were no longer living in fear, and for the first time, we felt free. In 2003, we got a break in the case of my dad's shooting. Melvin Reine's family had started turning on each other, fighting over money. One of them finally came forward and confessed. John Reine, Melvin's brother, told the police the whole story. He placed all the blame for the shooting on Melvin. Melvin had been the one sitting in the back seat of the car with a shotgun in his hand, wearing a ski mask. They had driven up beside my dad's car, and Melvin fired the shot that tore through his face. Hearing that confession was vindicating. My dad had been right all along. He knew it was Melvin Reine, and now there was proof. But by then, it was too late for legal action. The statute of limitations had expired, so no one would be charged for the attempted murder of my dad. There was no legal justice, but in a strange way, Melvin did get what he deserved. He developed a condition called Pick's disease, which caused him to lose his mental faculties. He ended up in a state institution, in a state of dementia. My dad often said, "What goes around comes around," and Melvin got what was coming to him. By that point, my dad wasn't looking for revenge anymore. He had found peace in his life. We had survived. We had made it through the storm. And now we were living in paradise. My dad, my mom, and I were content. We had built a good life together. Looking back, I can see how that experience shaped me. It was the only childhood I had, and it made me who I am today. I'm a mom now, and I write books for children. I've found happiness in my life, and I feel so grateful for everything I have. After everything we went through, I feel like we won. Dad often compares what happened to Melvin with what he's been through himself, and he always says, "There's no doubt in my mind that I won." After all those years of fear, anger, and pain, he came out on top. We're still standing, and we've built a life we're proud of. My dad's recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional and mental, too. He had been through so much, from nearly losing his life to struggling with the desire for revenge, but now, he had found peace. He'd spent years thinking about how he would get even with Melvin Reine, but ultimately, he chose a different path. Instead of giving in to his anger, he decided to move forward. That was the moment we truly started to heal as a family. We didn't talk much about Falmouth after we moved to Tennessee. It was like we had left that part of our lives behind for good. We had a new home, a new routine, and a new sense of safety. I stopped thinking about what had happened, about the police cars that used to follow me to school, or the fear that someone would come after us. It was like we were living a completely different life, one that was finally free from the shadows of the past. But even though we had found peace, the scars of what happened remained, both the visible ones on my dad's face and the invisible ones in all of us. My dad had to have more surgeries over the years, but he never let it break his spirit. He became a man who lived for the moment, who loved his family, and who refused to let bitterness or hatred define him. I admired him for that. He showed me what true strength looks like, and yet the world kept spinning, and justice remained elusive. Even after John Rainey's confession in 2003, nothing changed legally. The statute of limitations meant no one could be held accountable for the shooting. That was a hard pill to swallow. We had been through so much, and even though we had finally gotten the truth, there would be no official justice for my dad. It was a reminder that the system doesn't always work the way it should. But we had our closure. We knew what had happened, and for my dad, that was enough. Melvin Reine was no longer a threat. Pick's disease had taken over his mind, and he was locked away in a state institution, lost in a world of dementia. My dad would say, he's getting what's coming to him, and there was a sense of karmic justice in that. The man who had tried to destroy our family was now suffering in a way that no prison sentence could match. It wasn't the justice we had hoped for, but it was justice nonetheless. As for us, we moved on. I grew up, became a writer, and started a family of my own. I wanted to make a life that wasn't defined by fear or anger. I wanted to show my children that, no matter what happens, you can survive and thrive. And that's what my dad taught me. He taught me that even when the world tries to break you, you can come out the other side stronger than ever. In the years that followed, my dad continued to live his life with a quiet strength. He wasn't bitter anymore. He had found peace in our life in Tennessee, and in the simple things, working on the farm, spending time with family, and watching his children grow. He never let the past define him. He didn't dwell on what had happened, or what could have been. Instead, he focused on the present, on the life we had built together. I think that's the greatest lesson I learned from my dad, that life is what you make of it. No matter how dark things get, there's always a way forward. You just have to find it, and we did. We found our way out of the darkness, and we built a life filled with love, laughter, and hope. I still think about those days in Falmouth sometimes, about the fear and the uncertainty. But now, when I think about it, I also remember how far we've come. We survived. And that's something no one can take away from us. Looking back now, I realize that our story wasn't just about survival, it was about resilience and transformation. We weren't the same people who left Falmouth. My father had been a man of the law, someone who believed in justice above all else. But after being shot and realizing the system had failed him, he took matters into his own hands, planning revenge that would never come to pass. And through all that, he learned to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. Tennessee became a place of healing for all of us. My father found peace in the isolation of the farm. He spent his days working the land and finding purpose in physical labor. It gave him time to think, to process everything he had gone through, and to come to terms with the fact that revenge wouldn't give him what he truly wanted. What he really wanted was to protect his family and live a life free from the fear and hatred that had gripped him for so long. My mother was our rock during those years. She was always there, holding us together when it seemed like everything was falling apart. She never gave up, not on us and not on my father. She believed we could rebuild our lives, and she was right. Her strength was quiet, but it was unwavering. She never let the fear take over, and she taught us all to be strong in the face of unimaginable adversity. For me and my brothers, the move to Tennessee was a chance to start over. We could be normal kids again, go to school, make friends, and try to forget about the nightmare we had lived through. But the past has a way of staying with you, no matter how far you run. I remember lying awake at night, thinking about the shooting, wondering why someone would want to hurt my dad. I used to ask myself if we'd ever be truly safe, and for a long time, I wasn't sure of the answer. As I grew older, I realized that safety doesn't come from where you live or how many locks are on your doors. It comes from within, from the strength you build after going through something that should have broken you, but didn't. That's what my father showed me. He had every reason to give up, to let the pain and anger eat him alive. But he didn't. He chose to live. He chose to love. And in the end, that's what saved us. When the confession finally came in 2003, I wasn't surprised. Deep down, we had always known it was Melvin Reine who had tried to kill my father. But hearing it confirmed after all those years was both a relief and a frustration. There was no justice to be had, no arrests to be made, no trial. The statute of limitations had run out. But we knew the truth, and that was enough. Melvin had paid the price in other ways. His mind was gone, his power stripped away by a cruel disease that left him a shell of the man he once was. In some ways, that was the best justice we could have hoped for. He could no longer hurt anyone, and he had lost everything that made him feel invincible. My father always said, "What goes around comes around," and Melvin got what was coming to him. But our lives weren't about Melvin anymore. They were about us, about the family we had rebuilt and the future we were creating. I became a mother, a writer, and someone who believed in the power of love over hate. My father became the man I admired most in the world, not because he was perfect, but because he had overcome so much. He had faced death and come out the other side a stronger, kinder person. Our story is one of survival, yes, but it's also a story of hope. No matter how dark things may seem, there is always a way forward. There is always light at the end of the tunnel, even if you can't see it right away. We found that light in each other, and we built a life that was worth living.